I can tell by your accent that
Okay.
we're going to be absolutely fine. So I just want to make a little bit of. Today is the 12th of January, 2015, and we're at the home of Hugo Meron, correct?
Marom.
Maron.
Marom with M-A-R-O-M.
Can you spell it? Can you spell me your name and your last name in Hebrew, just so that I have it for the record, so I can.
Hugo is Hugo. Hey Vav Gimel Vav.
Hey Vav Gimel Vav.
Marom Mem Resh Vav Mem.
Hugo Marom.
Marom.
Marom. סליחה. כמו מרום גולן. Okay, so we're gonna start now in English and get this. Just wanted to make sure. And today's our first meeting, and I want you to tell me, Hugo, where you were born, when you were born, and as much detail about your background, about your family background, about your parents, siblings.
I was born in Brno, which is the capital of Moravia, of Czechoslovakia. In German it's called Brünn, B-R-U-N-N. In Czech it's B-R-N-O, on the 9th of October 1928.
On the 9th of October 1920.
Into a very, very old Czech family. The name of the Czech family, of my family at birth, was Meisel, M-E-I-S-L. And this is a very old Czech family, dates back to something like 968. The first graves were found in Prague in 968, and that great-great-grandfather, if you want to call him that.
Can you spell the name for me? Your original name?
M-E-I-S-L.
M-E-I-S-L. Myself.
And it is the name Meisel in German means a chisel.
Okay.
And it originally comes from the Bible. And in the Bible it's an anagram of Meisel called Ismel. I-S-M-E-L. Ismel. And obviously the Germans made the anagram out of Ismail into Meisel, which is more German sounding.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, now it's been spelt in many ways. In fact, the main street of the Prague ghetto, of the old city of Prague, is Meislova, in which we also have a Meisel synagogue, and the cemetery is off Meislova as well. Anyhow, according to, I'll call it fable, based on gravestones, the original Meisel came from the lowlands in 968 and was invited by the king of Bohemia as a jeweler. So that's where my genes come from.
We'll get to that, of course, towards the end of our interview, but that's actually what you are doing now as well. You're working...
Well, as a hobby,
not
working.
As a hobby. But hobby is actually the greatest testimony to, like, my grandfather, he always used to sketch. But
yes.
He wasn't an artist.
Yes.
But at least I know where I get it from, because I'm always sketching. So
yeah.
these little things that are inside.
It's called doodling.
So tell me,
you heard the word?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
What I want to ask you a little about. I want to go back, but even before you were born, what you can tell me about your parents and about your parents and about the household that you grew up in Brno in the time of the First Republic of Czechoslovakia.
I know relatively very little about my father's family, as my father wasn't very talkative, but they obviously, according to the gravestones in the Brno cemetery, they moved from Prague they moved from Prague to Brno at the in the 17th century, apparently, or beginning of the maybe at the beginning of the 18th, between the 17th and 18th, according to the gravestones. I know nothing of the professions of my forefathers, except that my grandfather, Rudolf Meisel, had two, maybe three stores. One of them was a toy store, and the other one was sort of a male boutique, men's boutique. And Rudolf Meisel had four sons. My father was Pavel Meisel. Oskar Meisel was the oldest one. Bruno Meisel was number 3, and Walter Meisel was number 4. 3 of them, including my father, served in the Austro-Hungarian army. My father completed officer's course under in the Kaiser's army, and
in the Kaiser's army or in the Austro-Hungarian army.
The Kaiser Franz Josef was the emperor of Austro-Hungary, and he finished the academy, I believe, in Vienna, and where he later on met my mother. But he was the 3 of them, Oskar, Bruno, and my father, were in the artillery. And during one of the battles against the Russian on the Russian front, the whole.
I need you to not look there.
Okay.
To look here.
Okay. The whole brigade, or even more than a brigade, that my father served in was captured by the Russian army, as many Czechs were, and as a result of later who became the president of Czechoslovakia, Tomáš Masaryk, they formed what they call the Czech legions, and they became what the Czechs call the legionáři, and they fought. I'm speaking about the First World War, and they fought on the same front as his 2 other brothers were in the artillery. And during the war, his oldest brother Oskar was killed during the war, and Bruno, the second brother, was injured from artillery shells which were fired from the units which my father fought in. And Bruno actually was hospitalized for 18 years in the military hospital of the Czechoslovak military hospital in Brno, in what is called Královo Pole, which is just the outskirts of Brno. And he died 18 years after World War I in 1936. And we visited him with my father every weekend. So this is just the background. Now, my father was a reserve officer in the Czechoslovak army because he was a legionář, which is one of the legionnaires, as they call themselves. And he was also called up when, just before the Sudeten debacle, he was called up. And apart from that, in civil life, he ran one of the stores which Grandpa Rudolf, who we never met, both of us, we were 3 brothers.
Okay, you were 3 brothers.
We were 3 brothers. I'll get to that later on. I'll get to my mother.
Yeah.
So that was my father.
And was your father? Was he a religious person, or was he very assimilated into Czech society?
The Czech Jews were basically, I'm speaking about now the Czech Jews, I'm referring to Bohemia and Moravia as opposed to Slovaks. The Czech Jews were divided, I would say most probably, there must be some documentation around about that. I would say they were divided 60% Czech and 40% German speaking. I don't think it had any influence on the religious aspect of their how orthodox they were or not. I would say most probably that both of the Czech speaking and German speaking Czech Jews were both I would say very assimilated as far as Czechoslovakia was concerned in the respect to the division which we lack in Israel between state and religion, which was absolute in Czechoslovakia and has been ever since, which of course contributed a lot to the fact that anti-Semitism most probably in Europe was least in Czechoslovakia because of this separation, which was very clearly there were no religious signs in the emblems, in the anthem, and so forth, as you find in the United States and England and so forth, and all the other countries in Europe. My father's youngest brother, Walter, was a student during World War I, so he was the youngest, so he didn't participate in the war, and we'll get to that later. Neither Walter nor my father nor none of the Meisel family, except for Walter's daughter Renee, my cousin, survived the Holocaust. They all perished. There was a cousin who survived the war in France, and his son became a minister and so forth. Also Meisel. But get to my mother.
Please.
My mother.
And what was your father's name, just for the record?
Paul Meisel.
Pavel
or Paul Meisel, Meisl. My mother was born Erna Kubie, Kubie, born in Vienna to a Czech family, which originated. My grandfather, who was Hugo Kubie, I was named after him because none of my grandfathers were alive when we were born. Hugo Kubie and his wife Bertha moved from a place called in German Schittenhofen, Sušice, which is in the southern part of Bohemia, a very famous town because of, I think, the original matches actually were developed there and were manufactured there. It's not far from České Budějovice, where the Budweiser beer comes from. So I knew very little about my mother's family until my cousin Tony Spielmann, who comes from the Kubie family, who's a textile engineer living in Geneva during the communist regime, was able to travel to Prague and go to the archives in Prague and found documentation in the archives of my mother's family, the Kubies, back to the 15th century, back to 1450, with details which is a story all on its own. Story on its own, and my mother had 4 siblings. They all got out to the United States, mainly to Chicago, and Kurt, who was the youngest one, who was 18 years between my mother and who was born in 1901 in Vienna. They were all born in Vienna because my grandfather worked for an Austrian bank in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, and then he was moved when he was still young or just married moved to Vienna, where all the children were born. Kurt knew nothing of the history of the Kubier family. In fact, he suspected until he met a very famous Kubier psychiatrist in New York from the family, he suspected that he was an orphan and that he wasn't even Jewish, that the great-grandfather, that he came out of an orphanage, which of course Tony Spielman from the records in Prague showed that the family had moved during the 15th century, 1400 and something, from Germany apparently, or something like that, to Sušice, which was within the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time, and he was a tenor. And in the records in Prague archives, it not only describes the family, the address where they lived, but the records describe the number of non-Jewish personnel working for Hugo Kubier in Sušice. For that, not Hugo Kubier, whatever the Kubier was. I'm sorry, Hugo Kubier is my grandfather. Whoever worked for the Kubiers states in there that he joined the Home Guard and got a rifle and had to wear, this is very interesting, a triangle, a yellow triangle, not the Star of David, but a yellow triangle on his uniform whilst he served in the Home Guard, sort of. It's described as Home Guard. It goes to describe how much tax he paid. He was a tenor. You know what a tenor is?
A musician.
No, a tenor is one that takes cowhide or hide from animals, okay, and turns them into leather, which can be used to make clothing, shoes, and so forth. It's T-A-N-N-E-R, is a tenor. And it was a profession which was common, yeah, to the Jews. Anyhow, to get back to my mother was the firstborn in 1901, and from very early age, she was a sportswoman. Was one of the first to participate in the famous Danube swimming competitions. In fact, somewhere among the records, I have an ex libris. You know what an ex libris is?
No, I do not.
It's from the Latin, out of a book. Libris, libra is a book, ex libris. It's usually a drawing of the person, okay, with a name on it, and the prize is that she can then stick it in all the books and on the cards that she gives to people and so forth.
Okay. It's like an imprint.
Yes, it's printed, and in it, on this ex libris, you see a woman swimming in the sea or in the swimming. You can't see the background in water, and I think there's a fish jumping over her backside or something like that.
And this is on the Danube River.
This was like instead of a medal they received, it was most probably one of the prizes that a winner of a competition would receive.
And she was born in 1901.
She was born in 1901. Her youngest brother, Kurt,
16 years difference?
18 years, was born in 1919, if I'm not mistaken. And
where did your parents meet?
My parents, I don't know exactly where they met. I have no record of that. But most probably when my father went from Brno to Vienna, which was the capital, of course, at that time. My father was born in 1895, so and he joined the Austrian army. So he either met her when he was at the academy in Vienna, or when he was later, after the war, he studied at the academy, at the commercial academy in Vienna, which was a very famous school. And he most probably met her at that time because he married my mother in 1926. And that I know only from the wedding ring, which when they went to concentration camp, they weren't allowed to take any jewelry. So the wedding rings, both of my mother and father, were saved by a very good non-Jewish friend of ours. So they married in 1926 and had a son who she named after her youngest brother Kurt, but he died.
So your parents get married, and they have 3 children.
And my parents get married, and they of course move to Brno.
Okay. Why did they move to Brno?
Because that's where my father comes from.
That's where your father comes
the
from?
Meisel family comes from Brno.
Is?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe that my grandfather was still alive, because otherwise they would have named the first son not Kurt, but they would have named him after one of the grandfathers. So obviously by 1926 or 1927, when my oldest brother was born, they gave him the name of Kurt because most probably at that time my grandfathers were still alive or had just passed away about that time. They're both buried in...
I need you just to look.
Yes.
To look at me, very important, because you're looking down all the time.
Yes.
I need you to look at me. Should I take this away, the piece of
you
paper?
You can,
okay.
Yes.
I just need you to...
Let me have it.
There you go.
Okay.
Just a second.
Will you send me a copy afterwards?
You're going to get a whole copy of everything. Okay. Everything. Okay. So tell me about the kids in your family.
So I'm saying in 1927, my oldest brother was born. His name was Kurt, but before I was born, he was most probably by October 1928, when I was born, he had passed away. He died of an accident. He died of a chicken bone stuck in his throat, and by the time they got him to hospital, he had passed away. So,
and he's not even 1 year old.
He was most probably born somewhere at the either end of 26. They said he was nearly 22 years old. Anyhow, his grave is in Brno, so it can be checked exactly. I don't have a record. I have a picture somewhere of the gravestone. So he's buried next to my grandfather and my grandmother in Brno. And I was born in 1928, and my brother was born in 1930, in February, on the 9th of February.
The 9th of February, the 9th of October.
And my cousin Renee, who survived the Holocaust in Bergen-Belsen, was born on the 9th of September. And my daughter was also born on the 9th of the 9th. So 9 is some form of a lucky number. Significant is the word. Yeah.
And tell me,
my mother was a sportswoman. Not only swimming, but she was a tennis coach in summer and skiing in winter. Skiing coach in winter, if you want to call it coach or whatever. Trainer in winter. And that's what she did, apart from assisting my father in the store when it was necessary to replace him or anything
And the
like
store
that.
that your father ran or owned, was it the clothes store or was it the toy
My
store?
my father owned the men's boutique, you would call it today. In those days, it wasn't called a boutique, and it was in. Funnily enough, it was at number 1 Masarykova ulica in Brno,
Okay.
which is the main street of Brno. And my uncle Walter, his brother, ran the toy store.
Okay.
I always say that that the store, which was the largest toy store in Brno, had less toys than my grandchildren have, each one separately at home today, except for an electric train. So I was named after grandfather Hugo Kubier, and my brother was named after grandfather Rudolf Meisel.
Okay.
Okay.
And what's kind of one of your earliest memories of your childhood? If I ask you.
We both, funnily enough, we were all born, 3 of us. I'm speaking now of 4 actually, including Renee and her brother. We were all born at number 15 Legionarska, which is also funny. My father was a legionnaire. We were born in this street, which was in Brno, which today is called Sztabnio Kapitana Jarosze, I think. It was renamed during the communist period because the legionnaires were not communists, most probably, right. So they made sure that they changed the name. And we were all born at home, not in hospitals. Renee, my cousin, on the ground floor, on the ground floor, I would say, in Europe, is the most. I don't know whether you know anything about the way architecture is in Europe, with the size of windows. Do you know anything about that? That the first floor is the largest windows, the second floor smaller, and so forth, all the way up to the top. We lived on the 3rd floor. My uncle Walter was most probably business-wise more successful than my father, so they lived on the 2nd floor. And the house on the 1st floor belonged to the Placek family. And the Placek family is the same Placek that was that later was murdered in Washington as an air attaché, Israeli air attaché. He was on the same flying course with me in Olomouc. His uncle owned the house in which I was born. Okay, small world. Okay, and we were very good friends. When he was murdered in Washington, his name was Alon, Joe Alon, but he was basically from the Placek family. The Placek family, his father, they were not in Brno. His father's brother was had a store, a clothing store, very large clothing store in Brno, and they lived on the 1st floor. The house still exists. It's in the same condition that World War II left it in, hasn't been fixed. Many more people live there than lived there at our time. They most probably took the 5 or 6 room apartments and that broke them up into smaller apartments.
And would you say that when I asked you about a childhood memory that you have,
yes,
like one of the, which is not very important, but did you grow up in a warm house? Did you grow up in a house? I mean, your parents had this tragedy before you were born.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it had a big impact on how you and your brother were raised.
We were raised in a very, very warm environment, not only from my direct parents, very strict home. Mm-hmm. We would, of course, go to the synagogue on high holidays and so forth. Not on Shabbat and so forth, because both my father and mother thought that sporting was more important than going to shul. I remember pretty well the apartment at number 15 Legionarska. So I think I must have been something like 5 when we moved not far away to Vrchlické osady number 4, which was also called Huterův Rybník number 4, which was not far away. René and Uncle Walter's family, they stayed at number 15 all till they were taken away to a concentration camp. I remember I remember very clearly the day before I went to school the first day, because my father gave me my first watch the day before I went to school. I was not quite 6, because school starts in June, July, August, and I was born in October, so I wasn't quite 6. And I also went, everything seemed to fall in line with a very nationalistic Czech family. Nationalistic in the sense as opposed to...
Your family.
Yeah, my family. As opposed to Jews who were speaking German. We had no contact with German-speaking Jews. All the friends of my father's and mother's family, although my mother spoke very well German and insisted that we learn German, because she was under the impression, in addition to French, which we took at school already very early, she always claimed that another language is another culture. In other words, it broadens your
Sure.
outlook.
Was your mother, with an attitude like that, she seems like a woman who was very...
My mother was the one who beat us. My mother was the one who disciplined us. Our father never touched us. It was my mother who used the pracker. You know what a pracker is? A pracker is the bamboo type stick that you use for beating carpets.
Okay.
That's called in German a pracker.
Of course. And so it was very important for your family to be assimilated into Czech society.
Oh yes.
Czech literature. It's the first. Can you explain to me a little bit about the First Republic? I mean, I know, but people who will be watching this don't really know about the times that you were born in. You were born in a country that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. Listen, the Czechs, I would say, the Czechs, most probably includes the Slovaks as well, because they came under the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the 17th century. In 1612, I believe, it was a battle on the White Mountain near Prague, the Battle of the Bílá hora, as they call it, and from that time till 1918, 300 years, they were under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and I must say that I don't know very few nations that survived with a very strong nationalistic feeling as the Czechs survived. As the Czechs survived the 300 years. Good soldier Schweik is a good way of describing what was going on at that time. So my father actually, both my mother and father, lived through the First World War, and saw this fantastic, I would say, liberation from the Germans, because Austro-Hungarians were Germans more as far as the Czechs were concerned. They were Germans as far as the Slovaks were concerned. They were Hungarians who ruled Slovakia. Thanks to the United States and President Wilson, First World War, and the fact that Masaryk taught in Chicago at the university there and so forth, there was a great influence of the type of independence which originated from the French Revolution, but was most probably expressed in greater, much more in the United States, in the history of the United States. It developed most probably in a more democratic way than the French themselves. And the Czechs, in a way, improved upon that, in fact, because they were. Masaryk was greatly influenced by the Americans. He married Garik, an American-born lady, and there was enormous influence in the government, in the type of presidency.
And also, the First Republic was a very strong democracy. It was very
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It was a very strong democracy. I felt that by the time that the democracy was over in 1939, when the Germans invaded, in March 1939, I thought it was a lifetime, and when you come to think of it, we in Israel here, we're already here nearly 70 years, and it seemed, for me as a child, that the 20 years was a lifetime. And when you think of it, that Czechoslovakia was actually established in 1918, and by 1939 it was finished. It was finished, and for at least 6 years, during the German occupation. And there was a very interesting to get to the issue which is in a way influenced my life, and the fact that I'm speaking to you in English results from the fact that my parents, just like her siblings in Vienna, who stayed in Vienna and were professionals in Vienna, started leaving for the United States. There was never any thought in our family of Zionism.
Okay, that's exactly what I asked you. Did you grow up in a house that was... Did you have a picture of Herzl in the house, or did your parents talk about...
Never heard of him. Never heard of Herzl. I knew that there was a blue box for collecting money in every home.
Did you have one in your home?
Yes, we had one in our home, because somebody made sure that we got one, right? So, but nobody that I knew of at that time, from either the Kubis or the Meisels, had ever gone to Palestine.
Have you heard of Palestine, though? Like when you were a kid?
Oh, yes.
When you were a kid,
education.
Did you go to some Sunday school?
Yes, we had a teacher. Our father taught us Hebrew, and we had in the Czech schools. It's part of what we're talking about. I think in our class there must have been 4 religions. I'm speaking about our elementary school, and when once a week or twice a week was religious classes, the class split up and they went to the Jewish. We were only 3 Jewish boys in my class out of 30. There were Catholics and, of course, Greek Orthodox and Protestants. So everybody went to his sort of religious teacher during that lesson. That was the only time that the class split up. Now, the very interesting thing is, I remember my first teacher, who I think stayed with us. I remember both teachers from 1 till 3rd class. His name was Sanka. Why I remember him very clearly? Because he was black-bearded. He was. He had a very big black beard, something like Herzl, very much like Herzl. His name was Sanka, and he was going out with our au pair, or our slechna, which is called, who lived with us and looked after the children when my mother was out skiing or coaching tennis. She was the one who took care of us.
And your teacher was dating her?
And my teacher, I didn't know that from the beginning, but it somehow came to light after he was not teaching us anymore, and he was replaced by a teacher by the name of Travnicek. It's a story I only discovered recently, that his son corresponded with Judita Matyashova in Prague, but that's another story. When I lecture or teach at the university at any time, I always tell the people in the front row, I will all of a sudden turn to you and say, "Where was I?" It isn't because you were asleep.
It's because
I have spread from the subject that I was talking, and I don't remember where I was. It wasn't because you were asleep.
And you're not the only person who does that. So,
okay, so and I picked it up from somebody. So Sanka, I remember for one thing. Whenever
I'm listening. I'm just fixing your yeah.
Okay.
So you remember?
I remember Sanka coming. Whenever he entered the class in the morning, the whole classroom got up. Everybody got up. Boys only. The girls were upstairs. Like my cousin was 1 month older than myself, Renee, Meisel was in the girls' section, which was upstairs in the school. Okay. Whenever Sanka entered the class would get up. He would go to the board, and whilst we were standing, he would say, "Let us pray to God, the only one, for all of us." And he would say a few words, and the part that I remember, apart from respecting our father and mother, which is the 5th or 6th commandment, he would say, "And may God protect us all from the Germans and the Hungarians," every morning. So that is the atmosphere in Czechoslovakia, describes it well enough, the nationalistic atmosphere, and I would say they saw a potential danger. They saw the country lived in an atmosphere, even in and I'm speaking about 37, before Masaryk died, okay? And his death had nothing to do with the Germans.
So,
this was not, I don't remember this continuing under Travnicek, the teacher that took over in the 4th and 5th form class. Okay. Now, both my mother and father, and I remember this clearly, read Mein Kampf, which is Hitler's scheme, if you like, or whatever. And there was a big argument going on at home, not only between my mother and father, but when they played cards, bridge, or whatever, and friends came and so forth. This argument started out, I would say, most probably from 1933-34, because remember, my grandmother and and my mother's and my aunts and uncles, they all lived in Vienna, so they were very much more influenced by the Germans than we were, and we were going to visit grandma in Vienna every few months. It was only an hour and a half by car.
Sure.
To go to Vienna.
But what do you remember the argument about it that reoccurred?
Yes, I'm getting to that. The argument was that my mother used to say, "This man means every word that he writes," and the sentence which is in my mind is the sentence in which he says, "I will ensure that Germany and perhaps even future Europe, I can't guarantee that, will become Judenrein." That was the word that he used. Clean of Jews. Okay? Not clear, but clean of Jews. In other words, cleansing Germany. And my father and my mother said, "This will happen to us as well." And my father said, "Ridiculous. It's ridiculous because there are 12, 13, 14 million Czechs here, and the Meisel family was long here before most of them. So if Hitler ever intends to do something like that in Czechoslovakia, he would have to get rid of all the 12 million. In other words, he wouldn't pick at the Jews in Czechoslovakia because they were Czechs. If you understand, that was his attitude. Until when he was called up in October 1938, when the Germans took over this.
We're gonna get to that very soon, because that's a huge, not only for the Czech history and world history and modern politics, but I'm sure that's a huge turning point in your life as a child. I mean, I'm sure that's
most probably the turning point in my life comes a little later.
Okay.
I would say between. I would say that my mother was in contact with her mother in Vienna, and all her brothers and sisters by 1938, end of 1938, had gone to the United States or England.
Because they knew what was, they felt it. They felt it.
No,
Or
not
the
felt
Anschluss.
it. No, the Germans were already in Vienna by this time. Anschluss.
Anschluss, yeah.
Anschluss,
Yeah.
and the prime minister was killed, and so forth. And Jews were made to do all sorts of. And one of my uncles was, because he was a social democrat, was imprisoned in Dachau already in 1938. And the funny thing about it is, just to prove that Hitler and the Nazis saw in communists and social democrats a greater danger than the Jews. The Jews was not a danger to them physically. In other words, it was something to do with economics and with...
The Jews, according to the Nazis, what you're saying is that the communists and the social democrats were a threat to their existence.
Were a threat to the state to Germany.
Yeah. The Jews were just something that needed to be cleansed.
The Jews were no. The Jews in the way I understood it always was that the Jews, he used the Jews as an scapegoat, in a way, were an scapegoat to the economic situation which took place after World War I. In other words, he blamed the Jews for the fact that there was no food, that money had no value, and the Jews came out of it better than any other German and so forth. I'm sure there's I don't want to go into that, but I want to get back to that period. So we're talking about a time when we are well aware of what Hitler's aims are, and it becomes critical at the time of München.
Okay, we're gonna get to
Munich.
We're gonna get to that in a sec. We're gonna get to that right now. I want to stop just for a second because. So I think we got a good kind of impression about your childhood. Okay, yeah, no problem.
Hello? כן. בטח, אני מחכה לכם, מי זה עודד? עודד היה אצלי אתמול ומישהו היה לפני זה, ושניהם סידרו את זה תוך כמה דקות וזה חזר מיד אחרי זה. כנראה יש לדעתי תקלה בין האנטנה בארון תקשורת.
So I think we kind of got the background of your family, of your parents. Like we said, very nationalistic Czech. When I mean nationalistic, I mean
yes, nationalistic is a good
very assimilated. There is the Jewish background, but it's not the leading force. You do go to synagogue on the high holidays, but it's about being
a complete separation between the religion and state.
And then in 1938, before Munich, the Anschluss happens.
Yes.
Do you remember this? Do you remember?
Very clearly.
Tell me.
Well, what I can remember is that, first of all, this is a discussion which is going on at school, this is in the newspapers, this is on the radio. The biggest surprise of that period is that we are convinced, we, the children and the school and everybody around us is convinced that the Czech army and the Czech Air Force has no problem in defending the country because of the physical features, the mountainous areas which surrounds Moravia and Bohemia, and that there are only a number of passes through which a tank at a time can pass. So that as long as the passes are in the hands of the Czechs, and the Czech Air Force is built upon fighter aircraft only, no bombers. What Hitler did, he based the whole German Air Force, mainly the Luftwaffe, on bombers. I don't know whether people realize that. Of course, the bombing of Warsaw in 1939, on the 1st of September, proves that the enormous number of bombers that he had outnumbered by much the fighters. The Czechs were on the sort of, they had no intention of invading anybody, so they were protecting. Yeah. So there was basically no Czech bomber, only fighters. And the whole military establishment, which my father spoke about often because he was active in the sense as a reserve officer, these discussions went on very often between him and his very good friend, who was also a coach, a tennis coach, and taught skiing with my mother. And his father, Tonda Sekas, were a non-Jewish family, very close friends. In fact, his mother we called her grandma, because we didn't have a grandma in Brno. And it's a long story. He finally, Tonda Sekal, took all our property and buried it when the Germans took my father and mother and grandma to concentration camp. The same night they moved in with a truck and took everything out of town and buried everything, clothes, money, jewelry, furniture, underground, which we recovered after the war when we came back.
Wow.
So this is a separate story.
But we'll get to that.
We're talking now
1938.
So the Czechs are convinced, and that includes everybody, are convinced that as long as there is no way in which Germany can fight, they will not fight us, they will most probably go and fight. Apart from the fact that there is an agreement, which everybody seems to have forgotten. There is an agreement between Britain, Great Britain, France, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, including Romania, which is called the Velká dohoda, which was called the large agreement, the large or the wide agreement. It was called a large agreement because it said, should anybody, any German, attack any one of these countries, the other countries would come to their aid.
To their aid, yes.
Now, the thing that happened in Munich was without the knowledge of the Czechs. The President Beneš, who by that time was the president, the Czech government, Mr. Daladier, and especially Mr. Chamberlain, sold Czechoslovakia in a way that I don't think that Chamberlain had any idea of being a politician and not a military man, of what it meant, what he had agreed to. And there was nobody from the Czech government present who could have said, you can't do this because these are our defenses. It's like the Czechoslovak Maginot Line was were the Sudeten mountains. And there was nobody there. So those people who say Chamberlain was a traitor, there's no doubt about it that he was a traitor together with Daladier to the agreement which they had made, this large agreement. The small agreement, which was Poland, England, France, and Czechoslovakia, was not applied at this point, because when finally it was finally applied with respect to Poland, but not with respect to Czechoslovakia, because it was hopeless already to come after the Sudeten were taken by the... Now, I'm speaking now with some sort of, you would think, with the knowledge of being an ex-military person and having studied history. No, I'm speaking about what was obvious to every Czech child and family, whether it's German, Jewish, or Czech speaking, was obvious. I don't know about Slovakia, because Slovakia, in this respect, they did not have this problem, because the Sudetenlands were not in Slovakia, and I don't want to talk about the Slovakian problem because I know much less about it, but it was not, nobody looked at Slovakia as a separate country. We were Czechoslovakia, which were four clearly defined areas: Bohemia, Moravia, defined on maps. I still have my original school map, which is upstairs. And it was felt that these four areas, Bohemia, Moravia, Slovakia, and Carpato-Ruthenia, okay, was a federation, let's call it, with which everybody was very happy in the federation. In other words, they wanted to be federated. They didn't want to be, the Carpato-Ruthenians didn't want to be a part of Ukraine or Russia. The Slovaks didn't want to be a part of Hungary.
Of course.
Or Poland.
Of course.
The Moravians didn't want to be, and the Czechs didn't want to be a part of Austria, right? So sometimes you have federations which not everybody is happy in, like Yugoslavia, okay, and so on, as an example.
Czechoslovakia actually was a good example of post-World War I, putting nations
based
together.
again on the United States fact that there were so many things.
Of course.
And also there was another thing which was very obvious in Czech, that there were so many different... What Masaryk did was he kept in spite of World War I, he allowed all the German schools and universities to continue functioning, and the minorities, whether it was, which were down to the gypsies, had complete freedom, which was not existent in Europe.
I think the best, you said it in the best way. You gave that example of your classroom in elementary school, that you had 4 different types of religion, mostly of course Christianity, but also Protestant and Catholic and Orthodox and Jew. Everybody having their own space to pray and go. I mean, you don't even hear that. That doesn't even happen today.
Yeah,
it's very known, and it's very clear that Czechoslovakia, during its the first republic of the Czech between the two wars, was an absolutely. It was ahead of its time. Mm-hmm. What I want to know is when you take that element, and this is a question that I have to ask you, when you take that element, Munich must have been a complete catastrophe. Oh,
there's no question about it. I think that the day that the Germans moved in, I'm sure that it was a sleepless night, not for the Czechs only, but I think that anybody who was involved in this agreement realized what they had done. It was too late. By the time the Germans moved to the Sudetenlands and the Sudeten Czechs moved out into military camps in Prague and so forth, because they had nowhere to go. Whether they were Jews, Social Democrats, or Czechs, they moved out, and Germans moved in and spread, and the relatives of the Sudeten Czechs came in and moved into the homes of the Czechs and the Jews who had departed. Hello? מי זה? תקף, יעלו למעלה. אם את צריכה משהו, אז תגידי לי. מה?
את שני הטלוויזיות?
כן, אבל הוא גם, את יודעת, בארון, בגראז', כן?
Do you remember, you said that your father, the Czechs, before Munich, before the, I think it was in August or in September, the Czech army mobilized.
That's right.
Can you tell me about that?
Well,
Do
I
you
know my
remember?
father joined his unit in Uzhhorod, which is in Carpathia-Ruthenia, together with my mother's and with our friend Tonda, who was at least 20 years younger. He was an officer in the same unit as my father, so they were both like first and second generation, because my father served with his father in World War I, and his father, and they decided to build a house outside of Brno together, and Tonda's father passed away, so my father took over the responsibility of finishing the house for his mother and his brothers and sisters. But anyhow, they both, on the same day before the signing of Munich, were called up, and I remember when they came back that it was obvious that there was nothing that could be done. There was no point in declaring war on Germany or fighting the German army once they had crossed the mountains and were basically within Czechoslovakia or Moravian Bohemia. I remember very clearly that it was upon the signature, when my father came back, that was the time when my father said, and that was the change of mind, complete change of mind, reversal, we have to go to America as soon as possible. That means we, Uncle Walter,
And
the
this is
family has to...
after the mobilization, after he came back from the mobilization.
Yes.
And after Munich.
Because prior to that, of course, prior to that, he was convinced that the Germans could do nothing, because nobody expected what happened in Munich to happen, so everybody was confident that the Czechs could resist the Germans. Okay?
And the Czechs, so that people who hear this, Czechs have a well-equipped army.
Could do nothing.
Helpless.
It was like Troy, you know. I mean, here was this horse, German horse, was within the walls of Troya. Yes, if you know what I'm talking about.
So all of a sudden, your father.
My father said, and I shall never forget this. He said, "The walls of Jericho."
Say it. Why?
Excuse me.
It's okay.
No, he said that the walls of Jericho have fallen. And I remember me asking, what does he mean? So he said, our mountains are the walls of Jericho. Jericho. So after that, my father approached. I know that my father. We had a very good friend, the Tomashov family. They lived on the other side of the street, a little further up. They had 3 sons.
Yes.
And the mothers were very good friends because they went to school together in Vienna. And the Tomashov family was very closely connected.
I just need you to look at me.
Yes, no, because it's a
Yeah.
question of memory.
Sure.
Because when you look at somebody, it's difficult to.
Okay.
It's like studying. When you study, you look at the material that you're studying, and when you're lecturing, you look at the people that you talk to. That's the difference.
Okay.
Huh? Ken?
אהרון,
As I say, where were we?
We were we were talking about
Munich.
Munich.
Okay. I think we're at the point where my parents decide
That is time
that
to
we
immigrate.
that we have to get out of here, and of course, and I mentioned that my parents' friends had 3 sons, and the Tomashov family was closely connected with. I don't know whether to call it a Jewish agency,
Are they
Zionists. Oh yes,
And this is
Jewish.
a family of friends of yours in Brno.
A Slovak family living in Brno. Tomashov was from Bratislava originally. They had 3 sons, and the mother went to school in Vienna with my mother, same age exactly. And one of the 3 sons is still alive here in so-and-so. He became very famous. He was a judge in Beersheba, and his youngest brother died during the War of Independence in Jerusalem. Was killed during his oldest brother died during the War of Independence in Jerusalem, and the youngest one died in Chicago. Is a very prominent lawyer, ex-Modi'in in the Israeli army, went to study in the United States and became a very famous lawyer in Chicago, but he's passed away. The only one still living is Aaron Tomashov, Willie Tomashov, who was with us during the war, and his father, through a Jewish connection in London, connected the one of the rabbis by the name of Rabinovich in London, who eventually, this particular rabbi, became the chief rabbi of South Africa.
Okay.
And he connected with him, and this rabbi promised to find a home for his 3 sons in England. Now, we're talking about a period in which anybody who wants to go to the United States, like my parents wanted to go, and Walter, my uncle, and his wife wanted to go, was very, very difficult because there was a quota, as today, and you had to wait in line. How do I know? Because finally, when I went through the documents after the war, I found Walter Meisel's application to the U.S. Embassy consulate in Prague to go to the United States. I found the actual document in which he made his application, and I know that my parents wanted to go to the United States, but by that time, Kurt, the youngest one, my youngest uncle, had already reached Chicago and was working in Chicago. I know that Auntie Gussie and her husband Heinz were already in the United States, and that Aunt Grete was already in Wales, and Uncle Walter was also in Wales somewhere on the way to the United States. They were sort of working their way to the United States. So there was no question of anything but the United States. And it was, and it came to it through Tomashov, who decided that as we cannot, he was waiting to go to Palestine. They were all waiting to go to Palestine. They were Zionists, and they had applied to go to Palestine.
I thought they wanted to go to London.
They wanted to go to Palestine. I'm speaking about the parents.
Okay.
The family wanted to go to Palestine. But the certificate which you need to go to Palestine hadn't come from England. Would come from England. So they decided they would try and send the children to England through Rabbi Rabinovich. And when Rabbi Rabinovich found a place for the 3 Tomashov boys, Tomashov told Paul Meisel, my father, why don't wait for the United States, send them in the meantime to England and we'll follow, and you'll follow, and so forth. So my father wrote to Rabbi Rabinovich, and Rabbi Rabinovich arranged a place for us. I have all this correspondence between my father and Rabinovich, and I have the answers from Rabinovich. Historically, I think it's a very interesting point. I found a postcard from Rabbi Rabinovich to my father, who says, I have found a good Jewish home for your 2 boys, but I request you not to tell anyone in Brno about what I have done, because I don't want all the Jews in Brno turning to me. Okay? We have it in black and white. Anyhow, at this point, and until I came back from England, I had no idea until I found all the letters and correspondence that my parents had kept, and that Tonda Sekal kept after my parents were taken to concentration camp, and gave it back to us together with all the property which they looked after. I did not know that we were not actually, that Rabinovich wasn't the only arrangement that my parents had made, and they had approached the organization which Nicholas Winton had set up in England. And I have this correspondence in parallel. Now, I knew nothing about Tomashov, I knew nothing about Rabinovich, and I knew nothing about Nicholas Winton or the organization in London before we left for England. I have to go back to 1937.
Okay.
In 1937, from the time we were old enough to hear the story about Kurt, our brother, we approached our parents that we wanted a brother.
You and your
You and Rudy, my
brother.
my brother Rudy,
Who's 2 years younger than you, is that correct?
a year and a half, nearly 2 years, yes. So my parents instructed us to make sure that every night when we went to bed, there would be in this double window, prior to this double paned window, there would be food on the windowsill for the stork to bring a brother. Until one day in 1937, I was 9 years old already, they brought a boy, a Catholic boy, and brought him home, age between myself and Rudy, middle, not older than me.
Your parents?
Yes, adopted this Catholic boy, who by the month of April, 1 month after the Germans
Anschluss.
Anschluss is in Austria.
Oh, you're talking
After the invasion on the 14th of March 1939, in April sometime, I don't know the date, most probably in some German record it exists, a German guest. I happened to be home from school, it must have been lunchtime, and my mother was alone at home. Nobody else was. The other 2 boys were not at home. No, he was at home. Rudy was not at home. A German, 2 Gestapo, a man and a woman, arrived. I remember them as yesterday, in dark brown leather coats practically to the floor, and both of them had this Hakenkreuz on the lapel. And they came, knocked on the door, addressed my mother and said, "We've come to pick up Peter." That's what I remembered later on. I would tell this.
Peter is this adopted kid.
Yes. Whose name was not Peter, that we found out later, but came to pick up Peter, and my mother said, "Why?" He said, "Well, no Christian child can continue living in a Jewish family," and they returned him to, or they said, whilst I was standing there, I saw my mother starting to cry, and they said, "Pack everything, all his, into suitcases, and if there's any doubt about toys belonging to him or this, if there's any doubt whatsoever, you pack them for him." And there was doubt, you know. I mean, we were given certain toys. I don't know whether they took the electric train or not. Anyhow, it took half an hour or so, and they took him away. It was traumatic for me, and it was traumatic for my mother. And so we're talking about April. Now, when I am going to jump...
No, I actually, before you jump, I want to ask you about, so we talked about Onschloss, we talked about Munich. Can we talk about the March 1939 when the Germans actually overrun all of Czechoslovakia?
Yes.
Can we do that?
Yes. The day, I don't know what day it was.
It was March 14th or 15th?
14th. March 14th, the day before, or the day before, or the morning of the 14th, Travnicek, the headmaster of the school, calls all the kids together, both boys and girls, into the big hall, where in the middle of the hall is Masaryk's statue, at the school. The school was called Náměstí 28. října, which is the square of the 28th of October, which is the Czechoslovak Independence Day, and Czech-speaking school, of course. And he says, at such and such a time, the German army from Vienna is going to be passing through the square of the 28th of October, and Hitler will be passing by the school, and all the children of all the schools around, which was quite about 3 or 4 schools around, would be lined up along the way in which the German army would pass, and you will have to be there. And you will have to be there. There was no talk about what we're supposed to do and so forth. And I don't know what time it was, whether it was 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, well, I don't remember, I only remember one. We're all lined up, complete silence. And the German army, these half trucks came by, and Hitler's Mercedes, with him standing up and his hand held up high, passed by. And out of all this crowd, I remember very clearly, a few German kids who were dressed with leather trousers and white socks and green petals on the socks waved and put their hands up to Heil Hitler. And I remember my classmates, Kuhn and Vohralik, I remember their names, taking mud from the park ground there on the street and wiping it on the white socks of these Germans. They didn't hit them, but put mud on their socks, as you know, so and so. And when I told my father about this, he was very, very, first he sort of smiled, and then he was very strict about any type of behavior like this towards the Czech Germans or whatever they were. Okay? So that was the 14th of so-and-so.
Did life change immediately for you guys?
No. School finished normally. In fact, I went to the gymnasium to be interviewed. We all met, which must have been something like June, July. June, must have been in June, finished school June. And I remember visiting the gymnasium, the classroom where we would be as a high school, right? Where we would be. I remember that many of our classmates, the same classmates, were going to be in the same class, which was a technical Realne Gymnasium, which was as opposed to classical high school. And I remember where it was and so forth. Why I remember, because when we came back from England, we went to the same school. Between the end of school and the 27th or 28th of July, when we left for England, is a period which somehow escapes my mind, except the fact there is an atmosphere at home which today I can understand, of my parents telling us, we're going to England, you're going to be alone for a couple of months or so, you're going to have a good time, you're going to go to school, and we will join you not much later. There were other things which were spoke about, and how and what they would do in England and so forth, which I don't remember very clearly. But they made us feel we're going on a holiday, to the extent that I know that both my parents, I still have the tickets, bought railway tickets for all of us to go from Brno to Prague, and in Prague we would join the Kindertransport. And I have to this day my mother's ticket, which was never used, because our mother said goodbye to us at home as if we were going on a ramble. That obviously today I realized that she couldn't take it, most probably, to go to a railway station with us. So our father and Tomashov's mother didn't come either. So Tomashov's, the three boys' father, and our father, and our grand uncle, who was sort of a Kubier from my mother's side, 8 of us left on the train for Prague, and we were to spend 3, 4, I don't know how many days in Prague. We can check from if anybody wanted to investigate it, we could check the date of the railway ticket and the date when we went to England. We spent for the first time in Prague. So it was for us it was a fantastic occasion. Like, I don't know, if you'd never been to Washington, you lived in Detroit, and somebody was going to take you to see Washington and the museums and the castle and Václavské náměstí, and all this was very, very... yes, and we went to Barrandov to see the swimming, and the swimming pool was up there, the famous swimming pool, and so on, and so Petrov and everything, you know. It was really a very interesting time, and in the end they brought us to the railway station, to the Wilson station.
Then it was Wilson.
Yeah.
Wilson.
It still is.
Still is, yeah.
Still is Wilsonovo. And they put us on the train. There were no grown-ups. The train was sealed with olověné plomby. With they put the windows weren't allowed to be lowered. Slightly different from Matěj Mináč's film, where he puts the baby back, the girl back into the train, I don't think that was possible because the windows were closed. We weren't allowed to have most probably they had. This was the last transport, so they most probably had experience from previous transport.
This is what is the date? This is like
28th,
July.
28th, I think, or
Of
something.
July.
Yes, we arrived
1929.
in England on the 1st of August.
Now,
The train goes to Dresden. It's sealed. The train is sealed. There are no grown-ups on the train, only children in the carriages that we're in. The train stops many times on the way, side park. And we arrived in Dresden, we arrived in Leipzig whenever we arrived. And to us, Leipzig was the most famous and the largest railway station in the whole of Europe. It had 22 platforms at the time, so we were told before we arrived there. And
who's taking care of you? Who's watching you guys?
Everybody's got sandwiches and this and...
No, but who's...
Nobody. There's nobody on the train. Only children. There were babies. There was a 3 or 4 year old child in my carriage. I was with Rudy and some other. I think we were 6 or 7 in the cabin. There were cross cabins like this with a passageway outside. Anyhow, what I remember is the train stopped. They opened the locks. The Gestapo was standing on the platform in Leipzig, and behind the behind the Gestapo guys in uniform were tables on trestles, and there were cocoa machines or cocoa jugs and sandwiches spread out, and behind them were standing women with large yellow stars of David. So we realized that they were already marked as Jews. We were in Leipzig, and we received food for the first time since we left Prague, and cocoa, and everybody received a postcard a picture postcard, where on the back it showed some kind of part of Leipzig, at the church, the cathedral, and so forth. And we were told by the Gestapo that we could each write 25 words to our parents that we were safely en route in Leipzig. And I still have this postcard. So, it's in Yad Vashem, who knows? It's upstairs somewhere. So both Rudy and I each separately wrote a postcard home, and from then on I don't remember the train until we were approaching the border. We crossed the border of Germany into no man's land between Germany. The train stopped at the border, and the Gestapo came, or the police or whatever it was, in German uniforms came on, and they started searching the suitcases. Opening the suitcase, what have you got, what are you taking out of Germany, most probably customs. And very rough and very unpleasant behavior. And within a few minutes we crossed the border, and the Dutch people came on board smiling and nice and this and that, very, very friendly, a completely different atmosphere, which made us feel very, very well. And of course we didn't expect anything else from the Germans. The Czechs wouldn't expect anything else from the Germans. And within a few hours we arrived at the Hook of Holland, and the train pulled up right next to the boat. The first time in my life we saw a boat, the enormous size, you could turn so, and this train, we got out of the train, and waiting next to the train were again trestles, but this time very friendly people and we got white sandwiches, which were sandwiches, 2 pieces of white bread, and in between was butter, and it was English bread or Dutch bread, and it was like wet. It was so we'd never eaten bread like this. It wasn't like challah. It was English. I don't know whether you know this type of bread. If you've ever had it, when you eat it, you think it's wet.
Okay.
Anyhow, that was the food we received, and we got on board, and The only thing I remember, it was a very crowded cabin. We must have been at least 4 to 6 children in the cabin, one on top of another. And 2 things I remember. One, as the boat started moving, the Czech anthem, everybody sang and so forth. That I remember very clearly. And I remember losing my cough during the crossing. I coughed all my life. As a child, they thought I had all kinds of lung problems and so forth. And that was the last time I coughed. And I never coughed ever since then.
Really?
Yeah, it was just a personal thing. Okay. So that was it. So by morning, very early in the morning, we reached Hook of Holland to Harwich. We reached Harwich, the boat reached Harwich, we got off the boat, and we were moved. We did not see our luggage from the time we left the train until we got into a very large warehouse on the boat side, on the wharf, where we found our luggage, and each picked up his 2 suitcases, and we got on the train. I remember I was a little late in finding the luggage. I was afraid that the train would go away. I was put in charge of my brother as a father, so I was continuously looking after him. For him, it was a trauma all his life, because when we got back after the war, and through his life afterwards, he never remembered his parents. I mean, he knew by pictures who were his parents, but he could not remember anybody hitting him or any action which would have put him into personal contact. And it was a trauma all his life until he died. He was a pilot in the in the U.S. Air Force and so forth. He at his funeral, the president, when he fought 4 years in the Korean War, and when he died, he had a Air Force funeral in Los Angeles. They brought the flag from the president with a letter to his widow, and so forth. Anyhow,
but he just didn't have any memory. He didn't have the
which I realized only. Which I realized. I remember. I was one of the best cooks in the Israeli Air Force. I remembered all the cooking, and I love cooking to this day. Everything my mother used to stand next to her skirt and watch her putting the various stuff together, hoping that she would let me wipe the whipped cream at the end.
Can I ask you?
Yes.
I want to ask you a very personal question, and it's: do you remember standing on that platform in Prague and saying goodbye to your father?
I remember very clearly looking out of the window, and for a moment there were so many people on the platform, grown-ups mainly. It took me, I was sort of panicking for a moment because I couldn't see him, and finally I saw him together with Tomashov and my grandfather, who was there, my uncle, Großonkel, it's called in German, great uncle. He's a brother of my grandfather, who was not alive anymore. So he was there. Yes, I remember very clearly. I remember the small children crying in the sun. So to stop them crying, I took out sandwiches which I had and gave them something to eat to stop them. That I remember very clearly. We had a lot of food which was finished. By the time I think we got out of Czechoslovakia, the food was finished. And then we were a whole day without food, or a couple of days without food, until we got to Leipzig. Now, Willie Tomashov, or Aaron...
So you're traveling with your brother and the 3 neighbors?
Yes.
boys.
Yes.
And you
Plus
guys are like a group.
200 over
Of course,
200. Yes.
of course.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
you
we were a
guys-
group of 5.
you
We were
guys came
together in
from-
the same
From
cabin.
Brno to Prague, and then you spent the time together in Prague. So you guys are like a unit.
Oh, yes, definitely. We were a unit to the extent that we finally got to Liverpool Street Station, which is the international platform. We arrived early in the morning, must have been 6:37. Everybody was picked up except these 5 boys. And we were sitting on these suitcases as trains one after another came, and one after another next to the platform, it's a very unique thing in England, was a road in which all the taxis were lined up. So people would carry their luggage across to the taxi and get off. I don't know whether private cars were allowed there, but taxis definitely. And by very late at night, must have been well over between 10 or 11, a taxi driver came up, and I was the only one who had studied a year already English, so
And you're 11 years old.
yeah. So he came up and spoke to us. Of course, I answered. He said, "What are you waiting for?" So we said, "We don't know. Today I know who I should have been, who should have picked this up. Today I know, but only found out very much later." So so I said, "We don't know," and he asked us whether we were hungry. We were starving, not hungry. We hadn't eaten for a day and a half or something like that, boys of that age. So he put us all with our suitcase in his cab.
This is it's a cab driver.
Cab driver, yes.
Okay.
He puts us into a cab and takes us to a fish and chip shop and buys us, all 5 of us, yes. So the first time we had fish the way they prepare it in England, which is in batter,
Deep fried.
deep fried, chips which we'd never eaten. Czechoslovakia was not a country of chips at that time. We had every form of potato, but nobody made chips.
And knedlíky.
Yeah, knedlíky, yes, but not chips.
Okay.
Knedlíky. So, and he took us home to the most fantastic building that we'd ever seen in our life. It was a council house, must have been like 7, 8 stories, and he took us to a one-room, bedroom apartment.
Does he have any idea who you guys are or what you are?
I think he knows that we're refugees,
Okay.
Something like that. Was not a Jewish fellow. And he, young, I would say between 20 or 30 at the most, maybe not even that. And his wife and has a baby. And I remember the baby because he cried all night. And with the 5 of us, he put on the carpet in the living room, and we slept next to each other with blankets covering us only. And next day, my only memory is going down the elevator and coming out on the street and I'm watching, and all of a sudden this big red bus comes up and stops right in front of me. I'm on the
Sidewalk.
pavement, sidewalk, and he stops and goes like this, as thinking that I wanted to cross the road. Of course, I didn't want to cross the road. He went on. So the first thing I saw was a red double-decker bus. The second thing I noticed, the driver stopped for me, thinking I wanted to cross the road. And I didn't move from there, went back to the house. Anyhow, he spent 2, maybe, I think we were there 3 nights. The last night was Friday night, and on Saturday morning, he took me in the cab, alone, to drive around trying to find a place. Every day he looked all sorts of authorities and they spoke to the police that somebody was looking for us, missing. And on this Sabbath morning, he took me to, which I know today, to the East End, and we came to a large home, which was obviously an orphanage. And I walked with him to the front door, and the first time I saw a knocker. We don't have that sort of thing. Knocked on the door, a lady opens the door, And he says, would you have room for 5 boys? And she turns around to me, as if you're now sitting in front of me, not further away, and she says to me, you have any money? So I said, yes. How much have you got? So I said, I have 14 shillings and 4 pence. And I go to my pocket and I take out 14 shillings and 4 pence in cash, in coins. And do you have anything else in your pocket that's making a noise? He says, keys from my suitcase. And she turns around at him as if it was right now. And she says, I'm afraid, sir, or whatever, I don't remember the exact words, we have no room. We are full up. Today I realized that it was an Orthodox hostel, orphanage, the one we were supposed to go to. And she saw me without a keppele on a Shabbat with money in my pocket. Okay? Now, going back many years later, when I found the address where we were supposed to go, I wrote to the chief rabbi in London and so forth, corresponding. That orphanage was bombed eventually where we were supposed to go, which Rabinovich had arranged. I assume, I don't know, that the representative came to Liverpool Street Station in the morning expecting to find 5 Orthodox keppele, payers, which they were all in that orphanage, and he found 5 boys sitting on suitcases, no payers, no head covers. He says, I can't take these boys to our orphanage. Somebody will surely take care of them, whoever was sent out. So that's the reason why we finally, so on Sunday morning, not Saturday, the next day, he took us all to a hostel in North London at number 72 Shoot Up Hill, which was a hostel of the German Kindertransport. And there were all German boys there, and 5 Czech boys. And from correspondence that I have between us and my father, he says, stop fighting these German boys, they're all Jewish. My father writes, because we were fighting, they were fighting us, we were beating each other up, because we were blaming them for München, for Munich. Okay? Anyhow.
Who is this guy? Who is this taxi driver? Did you ever...
No. After the war, when I came back to England, I went to the police, they have a first-class taxi drivers organization, records and so forth.
And you don't remember his name?
Don't remember anything. Only remember what he did. And...
5 kids.
And most probably, he was young enough to join the army and didn't survive the war. That's the only thing. Yeah. Okay. Just as Judita Matyashova, she found who I thought was Peter. He was Josef Kamarin, our adopted son. So with all the search I did after the war for him, I today know why we never met up. He was picked up in April, if you remember. Logic.
This is your...
The Gestapo came to pick up my adopted brother.
Yeah.
And they picked him up and took him to the orphanage. We didn't know in April that we were going to England. So when after the war, when the Germans left, he went to the apartment. I know today that he must have done this. He came to the apartment, there was nobody there, except two Jewish women who survived the concentration camp. I'm speaking about April 1945. And he asked, where's the Meisel family? And she answered, there is no Meisels came back. He didn't know we went to England. So when we came back a few days later, and started looking for him. I mean, there was no way in which we could get together. So I never found. In 3 years, I looked for him through the orphanage and this and that. The orphanage was bombed by the Russians, but nobody was killed there. So finally, Yudita Matyashova, who I call her Sherlock Holmes. How did she find him? I had a photo. There's Rudy, Yosef, and myself standing. And she went to the place, the only place I didn't go to look. She went to the records, to the picture records of the Obecna Shkola, of the elementary school where we went together. We were in 3 classes, right? So she went to the pictures of the class, found him on the picture, went to the records, and the records in the school said that Yosef Kamarin lives with Pavel Meisel at number Verkhlitsky Osadi for so and so. Okay, the process of adoption had not gone through yet, so the names were not...
How long did he live with you guys for?
Yudita says 1.5 years. In my dates, it's nearly 3 years. Okay. In other words, between nearly 37 to 39. With her, it's 38, 39. We have not important, so it's only a matter of calculating. Of course, you know what happened. Yudita Matyashova found, when I met Yudita Matyashova, when I was awarded the Czech honor for my engineering and association and keeping up the Czech relationship, spirit and so forth, I was awarded that Czech national prize, and she was the one who was supposed to interview us, me. And I was there with my daughter Ivy, and she came one evening to interview, on the evening that we were given the prize, and we sat for a couple of hours, and during the couple of hours she spoke about herself. So in the morning, at about 8 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call in my room. Yudita says, I must interview you because I'll lose my job if I don't. So he says, I'm afraid you've missed me because we're leaving at 9 o'clock for Brno. Unless you want to sit in the middle of the car in the back and interview me during the trip, and I'm not driving, you may do so. So we drove 3.5 hours from Prague to Brno. Ivy was in the back, my cousin from America, from Albuquerque was in the back. And during the 3.5 hours, she spoke the whole time. And I didn't open my mouth. We got to the Holiday Inn in Brno, and my daughter went up to the manager, who was a friend of mine, and said, have you got any plaster, So did anybody cut him? So no, I just needed to put over the mouth of Yudita so that she can go to the bar with him and listen to what my father has to say. And that's what happened. During the story, I spoke about Peter. In December, this was in September or August, I don't remember now. I have the prize upstairs, so I could look at the date. I get a phone call from Prague. Yudita, what do you want to hear first, bad news or the good news? I said, good news. So I said, I found your brother. His name is not Peter Meisel, but Petr Kamarin. And what's the bad news? He died a month ago. And then she tells me the whole story, that he lived in the south of Moravia. Today I know why he didn't look for us, because he didn't know that we'd survived. And he was a very good friend of the mayor of this town where he married and had 2 daughters. And she meets the mayor. She never met him, okay? And the mayor tells him, Yosef always remembered a couple of years of a good time in his life. The only time that he was happy in his life was the 2 years he spent with the Meisel family. That was what the mayor told Yudita. And Judita,
Unbelievable.
the Czech television wanted me to come to the home of these two girls, his daughters, who were grown up, with me together and make a film out of it. So I said, first of all, get paid by Czech television for what you're going to do. That's the only condition I'm ready to come. Of course, I paid her expenses and so forth, but I'm speaking about they were going to make money out of this film. So I says, first of all, make sure they pay you. Once they've paid you, I'm ready to come with you to see this family. Well, it never happened because I don't know, she wasn't interested in getting paid or whatever it was. Anyhow, I never met the girls because there was no point. There was no connection really, you know. There's nothing that...
We're gonna be done. We're gonna be done. We got just 10 more minutes.
because I have another meeting.
I know. Or what we can do is we can stop now.
No, go, whatever you have, I'll get a phone call.
Okay. Also, this taxi driver in London. I mean, this is an amazing story. I mean,
Not found. It was I employed people. I employed.
you put like people to try and find him.
You know, I employed an agency.
To track him down.
Yes.
Yeah.
I went to the little. You know, I thought perhaps that after the war, that his father or his children took up the same. Nothing. I had no name. I had the story.
So you get to this orphanage with all these Kinder
Transport,
but from Germany,
Yeah.
and
the most wonderful thing
yeah.
happens. We of course go to school right away. School started. We go to the Haben School in Swiss Cottage. Notice certain names I remember. An English school, secondary school, and we arrive the day the war breaks out. 1 month before the war, 1 month we're there in this school. Okay, we arrived on the 1st of August. Let's say we get to this hostel on the 5th of August. On the 3rd of September, war is declared on Germany. I remember hearing the speech of the king. And we're at school, and within a few weeks, and I'm not sure whether we're talking about October, there are people still, only recently I met one of the German boys in Netanya who was visiting England, Kurt Marx, one of the Marx Engel communistic from that historical family of Marx. We had dinner together. We were refugees. Okay, after a few letters from my parents, I suppose we stopped beating each other up, and we're going to the school, and we're issued gas masks, and bombing starts. I remember Monday morning coming to school, and there is a big bomb hole in the middle of the playground, school playground. And we are told that next day we're to arrive at school with our suitcases. We were given labels with a number again, the same as in Prague. And overnight, from being refugees, we became evacuees. Together with all the children in London who were sent north in order to get out of the bombing range of London.
Where did they evacuate?
We were put on the train. Again.
So Hugo, where are you evacuated to?
So first of all, how does it happen? We're given these labels. We bring our suitcases to the school. I don't remember how we got to the railway station, whether by bus, don't know. We got to a train, most probably King's Cross or one of those stations, because we were going on a train. Now, the train was full of kids. There were no grown-ups on the train.
Okay.
A reminder of what happened. And the first stop of the train, if I'm not mistaken, was in Bedford.
In Bedford.
Which is like 50 miles from London. And one carriage is, people get out, we get on the platform, and on the platform are dozens of English people. And they're going in between us. Who are you with and who are you with? Come with me. And the two of us went with a family that at the moment I've forgotten the name.
So you're separated from the other three boys.
Oh yes, separated. We're at school now, different classes. The other three boys are three different classes. Rudy and I in different classes, but we stuck together.
Okay.
Because I had this responsibility. Although we were in different forms, and he was not with his form, he was with me. And we were picked up by Mr. and Mrs. Chancellor, now that I remember, and taken to number 12 Bower Street, which is the poorest in Bedford.
In Bedford, okay.
The train went on and dropped off people further and further north from the same school. And we arrive at this home, which is about the width, this is the width of the house. It's a window and a door, and it's a street which is like 500 yards long. All houses identical on both sides. The only difference between them is a red door, red window, blue door, blue window, and so forth, yellow, white, whatever it is. And we are taken to the living room, which is, as you walk in, you come into the living room, and there is tea and biscuits on the table, and three Chancellor children, one boy and two girls. And they talk to us. That's me. Hello. שלום.
בקשר לאוטו?
כן.
רציתי לדעת, אתה לימדי יום ראשונה עליו, נכון?
מה אתה אומר?
You're at the Chancellor family.
We're at the Chancellor family, and we could speak about it a long time.
We will, but we're
But
going to sum it up here, and then we're
Okay.
going to continue.
Chancellor family, and I remember finishing drinking tea for the first time in my life. I had tea with milk in it. We drank only tea when we were sick at home. And then Mrs. Chancellor says, boys, children, she said, children, go upstairs. It's time to go upstairs. And for the word of me, the only word, I learned a lot of words. When you learn English, it's one of the words you don't learn because we didn't have an upstairs. We didn't know what it was. So nobody moved, So she says, children, go upstairs. And I see the three kids get up, and they went upstairs, and I'm sitting there with Rudy. Finally, somebody explained to go to bed, upstairs in the bedrooms, you're all together in one room. So there's the parents' bedroom, and there's the children's bedroom, and my brother and I were on the floor on sort of a mattress, I think it was, and the three kids were in their beds, and there's no bathroom. There's only pots. Everybody got his potty. The toilet is in the garden, behind in the garden, about 20 yards.
An outhouse.
Outhouse, yes. And apart from the kitchen, there's a scullery. Anyhow, I was there a very short time, because the 5 was too much for them, although they were getting 10 shillings and 6 pence a week for each child. But I think they soon found out that we were eating more than 10 shillings and 6 pence a week. Anyhow, I'm now jumping till about something like 4 years ago. My wife and I decided to go and visit and show her the street where we were evacuated. And I went to number 12 Bower Street, and I knocked on the door with the same knocker, different color most probably. Knocked and knocked and nobody answered. Finally the doors next to each other, then there's windows next to each other. It's like this. The door opens, a young lady, 30, 40 years old. He says, "Are you looking for the chancellors?" Says, "Yes." He says, "Well, Miss Chancellor is away on holiday and I'm looking after her cat. What message can I give her?" So I said I was here during the war, and blah, 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 and we left. And I I left my card, and a few days later I get a phone call. This is the poorest part of Bedford, because most of the children were taken by poor people. And I get a phone call of an Oxfordian accent lady on the phone. "Hugo, oh, how wonderful. I missed you. I'm so sorry. Remember me?" So I said, "Ruma, of course I remember you. That's why I brought Martin to see you," and so forth. He says, we spoke a long time. He says, "I don't understand. Where's this English from?" So she says, "I was the private secretary for 40 years of the Duke of Bedford." I was for 40 years the private secretary of Duke of Bedford. So I speak as they spoke. Apart from that, I said, "I'm sending you an airline ticket and I want you to come to Israel." And she said, "I'm afraid I'm no longer in a condition. I have a heart condition. I can't fly." And so I spoke to her only at Christmas. I said,
And she was the daughter.
yeah, she was the oldest daughter, the same age as me exactly.
And how long did you end up staying at their house for?
Very short time.
A week?
Maybe something like that, maybe
And you
2
still
weeks.
remember her and she remembered you?
Well, you know, on the phone, you don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know what she looks like.
Yeah, you didn't,
I've got
yeah,
no
but
pictures.
you spoke.
Yes. Yeah. She remembered very well.
Hugo, we're going to stop for today.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to...
Number of